From the SCC, no, we're not SCC. SPNN Studios, St. Paul Neighborhood Network. And if you want to call in with comments or questions for the show, there's the phone number, 651-361-8161. Now, just to remember, we don't hear the phone ring. We got to be able to see that green dot, flashing away. And if we don't see it, we won't be answering it. So that's just the way it goes. So you can keep trying. I guess if you got my personal number, call here first. I should turn my phone off. We got a lot of issues to talk about today. I'm going to tell you about next week's show first, and we're going to have Diana Longley, former mayor of Maplewood, on. Maplewood has just shut down visitors presentation. Why they call it visitors presentation, I never understood, but they did, and they shut it down. It's sad. It's got a 3-month hiatus, but that's kind of like a separation. You get the separation before the divorce. You like the separation so well, you end up getting the divorce. But boy, you should have heard the city council moaning and bemoaning and so depressed about citizens coming before the city council and not giving any productive input. Yet they can't give an example. They can't give an example of what wasn't productive. They can't give matter of fact, a lot of the things that were presented by citizens were their real concerns. And they were bringing forth the way the city council was behaving and what they were doing and exposing the wasteful spending of the Maplewood city government, yet we don't want to hear about it. And we don't want our citizens to know about it. And we don't want people to know how we use language to deceive. And if a citizen comes in and hasn't figured out and know how language is used to deceive, we don't want that citizen to explain it to everybody else during the city council meeting. So it was amazing. Not one productive idea has come forward from the citizens. Yet I was up there all the time exposing, hey, your Maplewood Community Center is losing hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, and it shouldn't happen. Get rid of the building. My productive comment was, sell it. Get rid of the Maplewood Community Center. It's just there for a certain small group of people, and the rest of the community doesn't get to use it. You know why? Because they aren't paying fees. But we're subsidizing by anywhere from $250,000 to $1 million a year. Every year, the Maplewood citizens are spending this money, and they will be for quite a while. But the solution they came up with is, let's just give it to the YMCA. Let them lease the building. But Maplewood's still going to lose money during the year. And, so they, we're doing such a great thing. You're not. You're not business people. And the same thing with the cable. You can't run a cable business. Cities are not there to run businesses. They're to run police stations, do the streets, do the fire. They shouldn't be doing the ambulance. That's another boondoggle. But that's not productive to put heat on them and say, hey, get your act together. Wow. So word on the street, there's going to be protests at the next Maplewood City Council meeting, and posters and banners, and who knows, maybe the bigger press, not the little press, will show up to find out what's going on. But it's really bad. Well, on the national front, of course, this show deals with judicial accountability and family law reform. I've always been pushing the parental rights constitutional amendment. Go to parentalrights.org, and I got a short video here. This 2-year period here is the real time to push this. We should have a House and a Senate and presidency that is in favor of families in making sure that families have constitutional rights, that parents have rights over their own children. Right now, they have some, they don't have a lot. Okay, the framers of our country always believed that parents had the major say, the majority say, the supermajority say in the raising of their own kids. Unless they were committing crimes against the kids, which were spelled out in law, the children wouldn't be taken away from the parents. Well, we don't have that now. Okay, we got civil litigation that takes away, and hearsay and all kinds of things happening that will take away a child from a parent. So, parental rights constitutional amendment. Let's play that video, and we'll come back after the video.
There's one thing we can all agree on. When it comes to raising children, family is better than the government. Sadly, in 1927, the Supreme Court denied parental rights to parents with disabilities, a precedent continuing to this day. African American parents also see their parental rights taken away at an unequal rate compared to other parents. The U.S. Accountability Office has attributed this in part to racial bias. In 2000, the Supreme Court's decision in Troxel took away the protection parental rights used to have as a fundamental right. As a result, parents of all backgrounds are seeing their rights slowly slipping away. Imagine your child being taken away from you simply because you wanted a second opinion on a medical procedure, or being told you cannot view library information for your children, including the titles of books that are accumulating late fees, or being refused access to your 13-year-old's grades without your child's consent. These are real situations happening to real people. Whether Republican, Democrat, or Independent, it's time to unite and act to protect children by preserving parental rights. It's an issue that matters to us all. Show your support by signing the petition. Then share this video with at least 5 friends. Together we can unite and protect children by empowering parents.
Well, it's critical, and in the next couple of weeks, in the next month, I'll be having a guest on the show that the state abused her parental rights and is giving sex change drugs to one of their children without the parents knowing. And the child was emancipated without the parents knowing. And this is a minor. It's just outrageous. And a federal lawsuit going on right now, and I have some video on that, but I either show the video or the parent will come on the show. It's just outrageous. So are families better than the government? Well, let's compare governments. Let's compare the Soviet Union and their foster care system, which has just been atrocious. You know, which is one of the reasons why Sessions and a lot of U.S. senators and U.S. representatives were meeting with Russian ambassadors. You know what the number one reason was, from my understanding? Russia stopped children from being adopted from Russia to the United States. Russia stopped it. Okay, that was their policy. And so you had all these parents and all these Russian kids that were in trouble and had very serious problems. I know parents who adopted, or couples who adopted children from Russia, and this, you know, a little older, you know, 8, 9, and the emotional trauma these kids had because they didn't grow up with the parents was horrendous. And the abuse that they took from these children was horrendous. And it's a bad situation, but there are good kids in Russia, you know, without parents, and U.S. citizens were wanting to adopt them, and Russia said no. Well, that gave a lot of these senators reasons to go and talk to the Russian ambassador and say, hey, you know, we were a month away, we were days away, you know, from getting these kids adopted, and you just broke the heart of these parents, or soon-to-be parents, and that's just part of the discussion that took place. the adoption from Russia. So who's better, the government or families? One thing that's interesting, I hear a lot about the Troxel decision, U.S. Supreme Court, and this video gets it right. It took away the fundamental right of a parent to raise their kids. It's still a high right, but it's not a fundamental right. And that's why parentalrights.org is pushing for a U.S. constitutional amendment, so it becomes clear who owns the kids. You say, well, you can't own children. Well, who does then? Who makes the decision for the children? You know, and the people that are saying you can't own kids and they're not property, then they're the property of the state. That's what they're saying, and nobody questions that. I question that. I know that's wrong. The parents own the kids, and if you can't make decisions for your children and guide them and raise them, and the state says, no, you're making the wrong decision, then the state pays for the children. You know, and it shouldn't be that way. But the state will then make you pay for the children to have somebody else raise them. And that's wrong. So supposedly with a family-friendly Congress and executive branch, this can get done, and that would force the hands of the Supreme Court to acknowledge the rightful place that parents have in raising their children in their faith and in their education of the parents' choice, not the state's. So get out there, parentalrights.org, figure out what's going on, sign the petition, and help out. You know, on another issue here, dealing with judges, it was interesting. I came across it was presented to me. You know how the Supreme Court candidate Michelle MacDonald was handcuffed during a civil trial for taking pictures in the courtroom, which is just silly. Give her the citation, move on, you know. But the deputies went through all kinds of gyrations and put her in handcuffs and took her glasses and shoes and told her that, you know, her client was gone, and you know, didn't know if she was still going to do her case, but they wheeled her into the courtroom in a wheelchair, handcuffed. It's just an atrocity. The court was just out of their minds, and it was an oral warrant issued by Judge David Knutson. An oral warrant. You don't do oral warrants. You know, the judge didn't see it happen. It wasn't written down anywhere. You don't do oral warrants. And this Dakota County, and got a ton of information, is so out on a limb. They're so whacked out there. You know, who cares what the rule of law is? And how they played the U.S. Marshals, the U.S. Marshals are getting upset with how Dakota County played the U.S. Marshals and forced the federal government to go arrest Sandra Grazzini-Rucki on made-up charges of child kidnapping, gun running, and one other really serious crime. And then when Sandra Grazzini was arrested, Dakota County said, oh, never mind, from my understanding, they said there was not a warrant on that. We got a warrant on something else. So we'll get that to you eventually. But here's what happened in Nevada when a judge handcuffed a lawyer during a court case. And this comes out from Associated Press, saying a former Las Vegas justice of the peace has been barred for life from serving as judge in Nevada for ordering a defense attorney handcuffed when she would not stop speaking in court in an effort to keep a client out of jail. The Nevada Supreme Court on Monday posted a Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline order censuring Conrad Hoffman for courtroom incidents between December 14th and last May. That's when he had Deputy Clark County Public Defender Zora I can't pronounce his name, Bakhtari, detained on a misdemeanor contempt finding after he ordered her to stop talking. He sentenced her client to jail for petty theft. You got to understand, if you got a public defender, if you got a defender, judges will try to rig trials. And you should see this Grazzini-Rucky case. Man, that thing was so rigged from everything I saw. It was the most atrocious court case I've ever seen. And I've seen quite a few. But when a judge is trying to rig a case, they won't let a public defender talk. They won't let the public defender put things on record, or the defense attorney. And depending on which way the judge is rigging the case, it could be the prosecutor too. You know, who knows? And so in order to get something on the record, you have to go against the judge. You have to speak. Because what the judge will do will say, well, and when you appeal it, the appellate court will go, well, that issue wasn't raised in the court, so therefore you can't bring it up here now. Well, because the judge wouldn't let you do it. That's why. Okay, so you got a public defender trying to get things on record, and of course what a judge a lot of times will do will say, okay, we're going to take a recess here, and I want you two attorneys back in the back courtroom. And the judge will berate one or the other or both and say, here's what's going to happen here. And you you say all your objections if you're lucky. You say all your objections to the decision that they make, and then they'll come out in the courtroom and then set a record as to what, not the details that took place in the back room, but just a summary. And the summary is with very little information. And so the people in the courtroom have no idea what's going on, what's being said, and why it's being said the way it's being said. And you kind of just sit there and go, what happened? Well, the legislature needs to stop that. The legislature needs to say, you know what? No attorneys talking to the judge in the back chambers. You put everything on the record. You got to have something to say, you put it on right there. And people will say, well, a lot of deals get made back there because the judge says, here's how I'm going to rule. So either you do it this way or here's how I'm going to rule. Well, no, that's not how it should be. And people say, well, that just saves a lot of time and energy and money and gets things done. No, that's the secret courts. That's what we went away from. That's why we have freedom of the press. That's why courtrooms are open to the public, so people can see what's going on in there, so you don't have this hidden justice taking place. It's pretty bad. But in Nevada, for a judge to handcuff an attorney who kept talking, that judge got kicked off the bench. What did they do in Minnesota? They just turned a blind eye. Doesn't matter what took place. We just turn in a blind eye, and we won't do anything to that judge at all. So it's pretty bad. Okay, so let's see. Remind you, talked about Maplewood, closed down City Council public visitors presentation. Unbelievable. Of course, everybody knows this that's familiar with Maplewood. It's run by the DFL. Everybody on there was heavily endorsed by the DFL. And this is way this group of elitist people thinking that they're the only people with ideas and know how to run things. And it's a representative government. They got elected. I get that. But not to have public discussion and for people to come in and to raise concerns so other people can know what's going on in the community instead of getting a one-sided report from the DFL, the Democrat Farmer Labor, which is really no more farmer labor anymore. It's just liberal elites, you know. So that's where people can say, hey, you know, here's some other ideas, here's some suggestions, and make a passionate argument if they wanted to. Well, not in Maplewood anymore. It doesn't happen there. So, well, let's get into some video here. 2 weeks ago, I talked a little bit about the Child Support Task Force, which has been ordered by the legislature and to happen every 4 years to just review child support laws and see how we're going there. And currently, they had a meeting 2 weeks ago, and in that meeting, they had an elderly man, a professor from California, I believe, who made a presentation about what does it cost to raise a child. Well, here's my calculations, is what he said. He's an economist, okay? And what Minnesota has been fighting over is, should we do cost shares or should we do income shares? Cost shares based, well, we're going to divide the cost of raising children based on the cost. Income shares, we're going to divide the cost of raising children based on the income. But the income of the parents really will have more to do. It doesn't just deal with the cost of raising a child, it deals with a lot of other issues. You know, so really it's more than just the cost of raising the child. Okay, so this is a battle that's been going on for a long time. I was part of a group that went down there and brought in an economist, R. Mark Rogers, who put together the cost shares model and said, here's where we got the numbers, here's what it cost. Well, here I'm going to have a clip of a child support referee, and you'll hear what she has to say about income shares, and then we'll come back and make some comments on that.
Yes.
My name's Jody Metcalf. Along the same lines, my concern is kind of what you're talking about, that, you know, I think families spend what they spend, and when the child comes along, they reallocate that spending. But the problem comes in when the families separate. Do you want to be the person responsible for paying all of the child-related costs? You're going to buy 100% of the diapers, and 100% was allocated within the family, and we have an income shares model in Minnesota. So we try to allocate that cost fairly between the parents in recognition of the fact that it's not fair to say to one person, you should foot the whole bill. Now, whether that's the custodial parent because they're stuck paying more than their fair share of those costs on a day-to-day basis, or that's the non-custodial parent because we have asked them to contribute more than their share. But at least in Minnesota, we attempt to allocate that between the parents by using an income shares formula.
Let me emphasize that that's moving from the cost to the child support award, the division. And that's, remember, that's not really what I want to focus on now.
Right, but the problem is if
That's
the
the policy
model,
issue, yes.
if the model says the party spent $100,000 before when they had no children, and they spend $100,000 now when they have a child, that model says there is no cost to that child, and I think that is unrealistic and not rooted in actuality. It's not a fact. The reality is we know a cost to feed, clothe, house, transport, provide health care, do all these things that we do for our children, needs as well as wants. So the question is, you know, if this model is going to say, I would have a hard time with a model that says a family with no children spent this much, and that same family now having a child spends the same much total because they don't want to go into debt. So we're just going to say that means there really isn't any cost to having that child.
Well, the income shares model, and she says it's being split between both parents based on their income, and the reality, here's what took place with the income shares model. And what they did is before, it would only be what child support was paid was totally based on the non-custodial parent's income. So if a non-custodial parent made $40,000 a year, let's say they ended up paying $900 a month for child support. Okay, and I know most of you got to be thinking, no parent making $40,000 spends $900 a month. Right, they don't. Even if an intact family, they don't spend $900 a month on their kids. Okay, but that's what the income shares model does. Not the income shares, the old formula based on the non-custodial parents. So that was deemed that the non-custodial parent had all that cost. Well, what they came in and said, okay, let's add both parents' incomes. So now if you're 40,000 and the other parent's making, the custodial parent's making 100,000, now we got 140,000, so the cost of raising that child is even higher. And then when we would go through all the formulas, the time the parent has with their child, we do the whole formula, comes back to that non-custodial parent still going to owe. Guess what? This number was about, you know, for one child, it was a little bit higher, 937. You know, if you had 2 children, it would have been a lower amount. So I'm just throwing out some numbers for an example so you can see the difference, the difference there. But the difference, if you had 2 children, the number would just be a little bit lower than what it was prior. And the whole thing, though, it had nothing to do with what it cost to raise a child. Okay, it had nothing to do with the additional costs that the non-custodial parent had to go out and incur in order to not live in the home. And it was all smoke and mirrors. And you're going to hear my discussion as to hear why it was smoke and mirrors, why it wasn't really income shares. There's a whole different foundation that this committee hasn't grappled with yet, and I found out afterwards that they said they didn't grapple with it, but they need to, is what does the state get out of this? What's the state cut? How does that work? And that's why the numbers didn't change, was because the state gets money. So let's hear what I had to say.
Just on the press aspect here, as far as filming goes, just want a couple comments. Because I deal with this, I try to film in the court. And it would really be nice if you had seen court cases and court records and what actually happens in the courtroom. And since courts are courts of equity in what you're dealing with, whatever you do here is just a pretense for a judge to do whatever he wants. And what I would, in the opening comments about filming, I wish the statements would have been made. The U.S. Constitution says there's the right of the press, free press. And the Minnesota Constitution says the right of the press shall remain inviolate. It's even stronger than the U.S. Constitution. When you're in these type of settings, you need to expect it. It's not about technology. It's not about circumstances. It's about what the people said. So hope you change the thought process of how the press interacts. Some of my history is I've been involved with the cost shares, and economists you might want to consider also in this process is Mark Rogers. Back in the day, we brought Mark Rogers in to talk about cost shares versus the income shares model, and the income shares won out. And in the back of all this thought process that's going on, whatever you do here, the decisions you make or the legislature makes in the back of their mind is if we actually do what it costs to raise a child, because Minnesota does that calculation for what you pay out for social services, foster homes, things like that. So that calculation is done. But if it's a divorce situation, it's whatever we want to make it to be. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but really not much different than that. So the other factor that comes into play is that if you based it on what it costs to raise a child, the amount of money that would be exchanging hands, and since the federal reimbursement is partly based on how much money runs through the system, That's what's on the back of the legislator's mind. Because when we went through this, in my opinion, with Senator Nevers, Senator Limmer, and other representatives, their whole thing was, wow, the state could lose $100 million because if we actually based it on what it costs to raise a child, we wouldn't be getting this federal reimbursement. You know, and some of your people's jobs here are dependent on that. So there's kind of a, I forget the proper word to use, conflict of interest, I guess would be the right word to use.
2 minutes remain.
And the issue, when this was going on with the income shares, and then it was widely proclaimed and announced, this is great, now both parents' incomes are counted into the equation. But it was all smoke and mirrors. What we found out was when we studied the calculations from a non-custodial person may say making $40,000 and a custodial parent making $100,000, there was very, very little difference in the child support costs. And you know why? Because it's about the federal reimbursement. We got to keep this money flowing through the system. So, yes, we now count both parents' incomes. Does it make a difference? Hardly any. So just keep that in mind. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Would you mind answering any questions?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Kathleen.
Mr. Kinley, you mentioned a Mark Rogers, sir.
Yes.
Who's he affiliated with, sir?
He's just an economist on his own that I know of.
Oh, okay.
It's been 10 years.
Is it the same Mark Rogers that you worked with, Bill?
He's one of my colleagues.
Oh, I didn't know that.
From the University of California?
No,
in-
no, no. He has a consulting firm in Atlanta.
Oh, thank you.
He's one of the authors on Mr. Dr. Connor's report.
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. I haven't read the report.
Yeah,
I heard
just so
about
you know,
this a
Mark
couple
Rogers
days ago,
was
so.
part of this report.
Yes, that's correct.
I was just gonna say that. It was funny that it's on. But it's on our task force page too. So obviously
Okay.
you can get.
Well, what was interesting there was that Mark Rogers was involved in this, in this report that was presented before the Child Support Task Force for Minnesota. There's another meeting coming up where the income shares person is going to be presenting their economic findings. And the big thing out of this meeting from this presenter is, his point was, hey, here's what it costs to raise a child, okay? Anything above this is policy. Whatever the state decides they think is important in raising a child. So if you think it's important that there should be, you know, an extra $400 a month to board a horse for the child, well, that's your policy. You know, that's extra put in there. But typically, each parent would decide that on their own. Otherwise, one parent is making the decision for the other parent. I mean, it's literally that way. I mean, some of the judges are going out and say, hey, you know what? You had a pony before, you got to keep the pony. Well, you know what? That may not work. And to hear their discussion about, you know, parents got a hypothetical, parents got $1,000 between the two of them, and now they have a child, and they still only have $1,000. You know, they got to reevaluate their budget. So they were talking about going to a lesser, lower price grocery store instead of a high value grocery store, things of adjustments you make, and then going, but they didn't consider going to a food shelf. They didn't consider going to, you know, Savers or Goodwill or a place that gives away free clothes. They didn't consider places like Amnion or New Life Family Services that help out pregnant mothers and new mothers with diapers and for free, you know. They didn't consider all of that in this process, that parents adjust to provide for the needs of the kids. They didn't consider, well, they did consider a little bit that maybe a grandparent would buy a crib. You think that ever happens? You think grandparents would buy clothes, or food or whatever and chip in for the baby? That never happens. Parents adjust, but you had this group of people, and not everybody there. There's people that are trying to say, get rid of this micromanaging, let the parents decide, figure out what it costs, because you've already done that. That was my point. You've already done it. You've already figured out what it costs. And you've done it through the social services. Somebody if a child is in foster care, the state knows the cost. Here's how much we're going to give you for that child in foster care. You want 2 kids, here's how much we give you. States figured that out. It isn't anywhere close to what they've calculated for child support in the income shares model. Nowhere close. And the state says that's enough. So you see the difference? The state's spending money and the state's receiving money because of this formula. And one thing I found out afterwards, important that I mentioned the things that I mentioned, is a number of the commissioners or the people on this task force came up and said, what is the formula? And I said, I don't know what it is specifically, but I know there's a formula and there's 4 factors in there. And one person said, yeah, there's a reimbursement factor from, just straight costs. The county gets a certain percentage of what it costs. The county's expenses to administer the child support program. And, they said, and I agreed, that, boy, we should look into that. And I said, absolutely you should, because that's what the legislature is going to make their decision on. Of course, I said that in that statement that I just made there. That's what they think about. They could care less about the kids. Believe me, this is about money and how to do a money system. I've talked to too many of them to know that kids are really, if it's politically expedient, but because there's not enough parents raising their voices and organizing to say, hey, we need to take care of our own kids, the state is there and the legislators there to try, a lot of them trying to figure out a way how they can control the family in many aspects. So I was glad I went, glad I was able to have a visitor presentation. That's not what they called it, public comments. But see, these people there versus the city of Maplewood, the people on these commissions, more of them are going to be open to having public comment in what people are saying because it's a diversified group. You have conservatives and liberals and various people appointed on both sides of the political table there. There's one Republican senator and rep and one DFL senator and rep on that committee. And there's fathers groups and there's mothers groups and then there's a whole lot of government actors, and that's where the conflict comes in. Believe me, the child support services and the child support attorneys, they're going to want that child support as high as possible because that's how they get their paycheck. Okay, they have no interest in a balanced, realistic, what does it cost to raise a child? They could care less. They need to bring more money in so they make sure their jobs are secure. That's just the way it is, and I know some of these people. First reason I went down there is because a number of the groups, and specifically government people, didn't just see it was filmed, didn't want the place filmed. You know what? Too bad. Unfortunately, the director of the assistant director of the Minnesota Human Services Department came in and said, no, this is what we do. But he didn't base it on a constitutional issue. He based it on, well, it's technology and it's just the way things are going these days, and that was sad. And I showed that on another show. One thing I've been doing down at the legislature, and that relates to the child support, is I've been telling and asking the legislature, go and review the Grazzini-Rucky case. Go review that case. Start on the civil side and go all the way to the criminal side. The Grazzini-Rucky case, that's where the two girls ran away and the mother, they gave a threat to their mother, either you help us now or you won't see us for quite a while. And they were just gonna go. And wherever they ended up, they ran out of the house without their shoes. And that's the story. It's been all over the national news and local news, and the convictions have come down. But I'm saying the legislature needs to go and review this case from beginning to end, and they will find the atrocities and the horrors of our judicial system and how utterly bankrupt at least these players are in the Dakota County courts and in the city of Lakeville, the police, and the lying and all that deception that's going on everybody's part, It's fascinating. But whatever you heard is not the whole story, and it's not the true story. Pieces of it are, many pieces aren't. Okay, it's been very controlled by the judge and by the press right now, and you haven't heard the story, the whole story. But it's all starting to come out. And what I'm holding up here is the appeal for Sandra Grazzini-Rucky relating to her child support. And when I made the comment in the case that, hey, it's about a court of equity, therefore a judge can do whatever they want, that's what's happening in this case. The laws don't matter. So Mr. Rucky could have been $12,000 in arrear. Now the custody gets flipped, but the judge goes and says, let's forget about that arrearage. Now Sandra owes money. Well, Sandra's job got taken away. She was a flight attendant and international, and that was taken away because the judge took away her passport. So now she can't work, and Sandra filed a petition that said, hey, I can't work, I'm in jail. So she filed to get her child support reduced. The judge did reduce it to 0, but as soon as she got out of jail and could work, not whether she was able to, but she was then employable, which she hasn't been able to find a job, and she can't get an airline's job because she needs her passport. The child support went up to $930 some a month, even though she's making nothing. And the district court judge ordered that any money that she has, all of it goes to her ex-husband, David Rucky, even assets. So she has nothing, can have nothing, can't even have clothes, can't own anything. And it's just outrageous that it is taking place. But you look at this appellate court case, and we're going to discuss this sometime in the near future, you're going to see how these child support magistrates and these judges rule on these issues. That's just really egregious. Lot of things there, a lot of things going on. Okay, so what do we got left here about, okay. We got some video here. Now, you saw and heard about the March for Trump. We got some video here. And in some of this video, we're going to see how the person actually tasing an individual. And you're just going to hear from somebody that testified, who was on the front lines there and testified or made public comments about what took place. And you can match up his public comments to the video. So let's, this is at the Rally for Trump at the Minnesota State Capitol, where the Trump supporters had gotten the permits to use the rotunda, and a counter protest came in and tried to take over the rotunda, which they can't do, which is illegal, is criminal. Well, at best, it's a misdemeanor, so it's criminal, and you kind of understand here and get an idea as to whether charges should have been filed or not filed. We'll see. This is some pretty good video, so let's watch what's going on.
So the state capitol for the rally for the March for Trump event at the Capitol, inside the Capitol at the Rotunda. And about 20, 30 minutes into it, there's some smoke out in the hallway between the Rotunda and the stairs going to the west. And apparently there's a smoke bomb, but I didn't know much about that. I seen it out there, didn't hear a lot of panic. I just kind of stayed inside and watched the program. And then at some point, some young lady, probably about 5'0", young, about probably 20 years old, comes running by. She got hit in the nose, was crying, startled and upset and everything. And her boyfriend was kind of bringing her with her, bringing them, inside the protection of the Rotunda. At that point, I dropped off my Bikers for Trump sign with one of the ladies that I already knew. And she held on to that for me. I went out and into the hallway to see if there's any brave people that wanted to meet me. And ended up standing next to the cop, one of the Capitol security guards. And we ended up, we're at the bottom of the stairs that go up to the House chambers, I believe it is, or the Senate chambers. It's just a lot of chanting back and forth. From the protesters and counter chants from the rally goers, and I was basically standing between the rally people behind me, and I was facing the chanters, the protesters on the stairs, and it was pretty much just chanting back and forth, pretty loud. And there's usually one or two cops next to me. I stood my ground at the right side of the staircase, as one of the cops was in the middle, and the other guy was kind of in and out and had to deal with other stuff going on. The protesters are kind of milling around and they're trying to intimidate people, and we weren't going to be intimidated, so a bunch of us went out there, a lot of the bikers and some veterans and some others, as well as myself, went out there to greet them. And at some point, I don't know if it was a decision the protesters made or a decision that was from the Capitol security officer, but they ended up, the protesters for the most part went up on the staircase, and so I was at the bottom, I was on the floor, just inches away from the bottom step, and I'm just faced off with the protesters that are, trying to yell through me, past me, around me, everything, and I'm basically, there's a few of us, there's a security officer next to me, and we're just trying to keep the separation between the protesters and the rally goers behind me. And it stayed that way for probably half hour to 45 minutes. It's hard to judge time in that situation.
All right, that just kind of gives you a flavor there. Now, the first video, when you saw looking down the steps, the protesters weren't there, and you're looking in the rotunda from the top of the steps, looking down, and the Trump people were having a rally. Then you see the later video when the protesters showed up, and then a wall barricade was done because it wasn't their space to use. This place had been reserved, okay? And so they're trying to interrupt the rally. That's what we're getting the picture of right then. So those empty stairs that we saw at the very first were now full, and the Trump protesters were threatening to come in and enter the rally space. So let's play the next video. All right, what you see there is just some of the chanting going back and forth. It was the anti-Trump, not the Trump people that were, the anti-Trump people were trying to come in and break up the Trump rally. But there was antagonism going both ways, and that's what that intent of that video was to show, is that, you know, there were some Trump people that were just as antagonistic as the anti-Trump people were, and then you saw the chants going back and forth. Now we're going to get to the video with the violence and the electrification taking place. And we know who did it. I mean, they got the video of who did it, and they know who that person is. So let's watch.
What I have been hearing is they're collecting evidence. And at first they said that the 5 of them who were charged with felony level rioting or mayhem or whatever the charge is in Minnesota, at first the county attorney had dropped that down to a lower level rioting. But from what I'm hearing from the state, I talked to a state patrol sergeant this afternoon and gave my over-the-phone statement of what happened in what I was able to, you know, what I was a part of, what I witnessed. Because I'm told, because it was done in a state building, the state capitol, that might prompt those charges to go back up to felony level. Now, they could only hold people for 48 to 72 hours, and they have to let them go if they don't have charges. They're still building the charges, and I'm just hoping that the charges and all the evidence is just pouring in, because there's a ton of videos that we've all seen on YouTube and whatever else. I'm cautiously optimistic that the state patrol and the Capitol Security and whoever's involved is going to try to do due diligence and get this right and build a strong case that is going to withhold.
All right, that wasn't the video. That was a jurisdiction question that was being raised. We're going to try to find the video of the actual electric shocking and stuff like that, and people being pepper sprayed. But the question here is, you know, 5 or 6 people were arrested. They're not being charged by the county, which means it didn't reach the level of a gross misdemeanor or higher. So the county gave the charges to the city because you could only hold somebody so long, but they gave it to the city to investigate for misdemeanor charges. And that's what happens in counties that have big cities. The cities do the petty misdemeanor and the misdemeanors, and the counties do the gross misdemeanors and higher. Which would be higher than a gross misdemeanor would be a felony. So that's what's going on right now. So the county is, and the cities are trying to figure this out. The county says, well, we've already figured out there isn't enough evidence to charge anybody here. And but when you look at the video of the violence, there should be enough evidence for the county to charge people, at least a couple of them, from this angle of the video. Of course, you saw all the cameras that were there. You know, there's probably about, you know, 1 camera to every 2 people down there in the place. So there's enough video out there, and we do have the video here of the person being shocked. I don't know if we're gonna get there. I would just,
you'll see the crowd start coming down. And what I try to do was, you know, stance my feet and try to push back against the people on the bottom row. So I had my hands apart with 2 different bodies holding them back and trying to keep them on the stairs. At some point, someone reached around and squirted mace or squirted some kind of pepper spray, some kind of chemical irritant straight into my right eye.